Yeah, my name is James Knox. I'm a Queen Creek resident candidate for Queen Creek Unified School District Governing Board. Reasons. Throughout my life, I've always served the public in some capacity, from being a former Montana legislator to being on city and county boards throughout everywhere I've lived: Montana, Ohio, Iowa, Texas, and now that I'm back in Arizona. I felt this was a great fit for me to serve on. As a, Several reasons. As a legislator, freshman legislator, I carried 16 bills, seven of which dealt directly with education and funding of it. So I have a good understanding of the financial aspects of funding a school board and what's involved. I really feel locally we have a lot of issues related to the school board. Poor quality of education represented by uh, our poor scores. I mean, even though Queen Creek claims to be in the 90 percentile of school districts here in Arizona, but with a math score of 63% and a uh, reading score of 57, to me, that's a D minus and an F. And we really need, for a quality education, we really need those scores up. So we're missing the mark. Across the nation, we're missing the mark. Problem. I think it really comes down to the change of focus of education. Much more prevalent today, the propaganda, the wokeness that we all hear about being taught in the classroom. But the problem really has been ongoing, much longer than the most recent, 4 or 5 years where we've heard of this. And it's because we're not focusing on the core education elements like reading, writing, arithmetic, science, uh, um, logic, and critical thinking. Locally, I'd say it's because the superintendent is not being held um, to requirements of having good scores. We're much more focused on social issues rather than the key or core of what education is. And that comes from, good curriculum. I understand over the years, people, educators have said, hey, let's go ahead and try this, introduce a more well-rounded social education, but that doesn't necessarily mean quality of education. I really think that if we are educating our students for success, mastery of reading, writing, arithmetic, sciences, history in its unbiased form, which is both good and bad, and critical thinking, then we're preparing them for life where they can use those skills and the critical thinking and logic to figure out what's important to them and kind of what they want to vote for, what they want to represent, etc. Variety of places. The liberal left is pushing a lot of this. There's a lot of school board members that, both locally and across the U.S., that are just not taking a stand of what's important out of fear of, well, I believe out of fear of what may come back on them. And now we're seeing it as a costly mistake by our low scores. Of it's reverting back, but it's also placing. So the role of school board is twofold, two primary things: to set goals and objectives for the superintendent to meet, because they manage the superintendent and they represent the public's interest, which ultimately comes down to the student, but parents, taxpayers, etc. Here locally, and I would say, honestly, it'd probably be a fair assumption that it's across Arizona and the U.S. that role has been diminished or not followed. I look at a lot of what happens here in Queen Creek. You look at just the board member, the board meetings. They'll spend 30 minutes handing out these Student of the Month awards and all this stuff, and 10 minutes on business. Where's your focus? It's, I think, important to recognize good accomplishments, but if those accomplishments are in the are less than acceptable, what are you really celebrating? I think the power is elusive. And I say that I look at our board here and other boards that I've observed. There's a big drive of wanting to be liked, wanting to get along rather than making the tough decisions and taking the stand that may go against the other members to do the right thing. So they're they're powerful, but again, it's an illusion. As long as you have board members that will not push for what's right in the public's interest, then that power is strong. It's funny you say that because I've talked to a lot of teachers on the doors and several teachers that have left the school district and they're leaving for a variety of reasons. But one of the things you hear is lack of discipline in the classroom, lack of support from the administration. And then they're really frustrated with a lot of the newer teachers that are coming in who essentially are coming from colleges that are indoctrinated and feel that it's their goal or purpose to educate students about SEL, CRT, LGBTQ. I mean, you name it. Now, when I say that, I think it's important. And as Americans, we've always valued people as individuals, and we don't believe in bullying. We don't believe in calling people out on necessarily their differences because we're all different in our own ways. But to elevate these differences as being more important than the purpose of education, which is scholastic accomplishments, that delivers a very mixed message to students, which I think results in a couple things. One, if you're not being held to a standard of you need to succeed in school and have high grades, and you know that, hey, I'm going to just be passed and passed on to the next grade. If you don't have those type of influences that are driving and placing expectations on you, why would you necessarily try harder? When you have things like minimum wage going up, where that produces a false sense of that any job you have should be able to support you in your day-to-day life. That's a false sense of what employment is, So if you're thinking, hey, I can have a job at McDonald's and make $15, $18, $20 an hour and live off that, that's not the type of success that we should be educating children for. Not to say that those jobs aren't great jobs for the appropriate times in your life and purposes. Several things you can do. First of all, schools need to have set curriculum that meets the requirements of what they want to see taught in the classroom. And that curriculum needs to be available to parents and the public at large for review. Now, when I say that, here at Queen Creek, they do that, but it's not easy. So they'll have a book down at the school district that you can go and look at there during business hours. That's not really convenient. And considering that they deliver 99% of the books in digital format, why can't they provide it in digital format to be reviewed? That's one issue. Frankly, any violations of straying from that curriculum into territories that the public would not support, that should not be tolerated. And empowering teachers to teach what they know to teach. Most teachers, I'm finding, they want to teach math. They want to teach the various topics and stick to that. They're finding that they're being pushed more to have to deal with bureaucracy, filling out various paperwork so they can get additional funding, They have to touch on SEL and all these other stuff that's being pushed from the administration and from some of the teachers union that we're not real strong here in Queen Creek. So we have to address that and say, hey, we're going to promote and encourage our teachers to teach the right topics and stay to it, and we're not going to tolerate those that stray off. And if you have people out of college that have an agenda, it needs to be part of the, I think, kind of the employee handbook of, hey, this will not be tolerated. You are teaching our students, you are teaching the curriculum that's approved, and you need to stick to it. Just kind of like you and me at work. Well, I don't know about your work. I know that there's certain things I'm expected to do. It's very clear in my job description, and I need to perform on that. And I don't think that's being at all addressed here in our local school district. It's a long-term solution. And I think, putting such requirements on the superintendent of saying the average test score needs to be in the 80%, that's not going to happen overnight, but maybe over 2 or 3 years, you can start to get there, with a real focus upon reading, writing, arithmetic, the basics. We didn't have these problems years ago. And with the lack of discipline, there's a lack of respect for individuals that may have differing thoughts. So they tend to get lashed out at, bullied, some will say. Unfortunately, now it tends to be those people are called out who want to question some of the SEL, CRT, LGBTQ stuff, which is really not the purpose of education, And I'm not saying that anyone should feel bad if they're, gay, whatever, that's their choice. We should accept them as who they are, and we should raise our children to respect people for who they are as people. It doesn't mean that you have to embrace their lifestyle, their choices, but you also shouldn't be bullying or lashing out at it. I think if we focus upon changing education and restoring to what it is, the core basics, we would be heading back to that. And you look at nationally, it just came out that our national average has diminished. Arizona is real close to the national average, which is kind of sad, but it's been a long-term problem that we've allowed, because we'd rather see, I think, students graduate rather than graduate with meeting certain expectations. In our district, we don't have a formal union. I've heard all kinds of rumors and numbers of, that there was a group of maybe 5 to 10% that were talking union-based topics and wanting to unionize. I think the district has fought it in a lot of ways, but there's always that push. And, part of the problem with unions, besides just the drive for pushing union agenda or the agenda that comes down, is it takes away from quality teachers being able to focus upon their art of teaching. And there's some really passionate teachers in our district that are leaving because they're not getting the support from the administration, because they're having to deal with kids that don't have respect. They're not able to discipline the classroom. And, it's really a problem. From what I've been told from the teachers, they can talk to the principals, they can talk to the administration, and it's more of, you deal with it. We're not going to make this a problem. I think a lot of it has to do, this is a judgment call, but that, the administration is overall not wanting to discipline for fear of parents being mad. And I think part of it comes from starting in the home. Parents that may want to be friends over parents. It's a tough thing being a parent, and at times, and sometimes, parents, what they perpetuate in their home starts to happen in the classroom. And if little Johnny is acting out and the parent's not willing to address it and say it must be a problem with the teacher, then at some point, when the teacher doesn't have the support, what do they do? Every case is slightly different, but I would say, discipline in the sense of suspension, staying after school in detention, getting your work done, not being able to participate in sports if your grades aren't good enough. But this is not a problem that can be addressed at the high school level. It has to start early on, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and expectations, clear expectations set forth for students and what they're, what's expected of them. Most of the education comes from a portal with over 3,000 websites. On those websites, there's access to the Zinn Project, which is focuses on history and the rewriting of history. There is access to Stanford SEL program and many others. And I've heard plenty of parents show examples of what's been taught to their kids. One parent was showing me how she heard that this was on the agenda. She told the teacher that she didn't want her kid to be on it. They would be informed that day so they could have the child removed, but the teacher did not honor that request. This is a curriculum from Stanford SEL. This particular, well, most of the parents I talked to specifically with examples were elementary students, so it was mixed into the daily routine. Specifics, no. From what I've read, looking at the SEL, specifically Stanford SEL Harmony program, it starts off fairly innocuous, not having a problem with that word, innocent, where it's, essentially teaching kids, people, that, we're all different and we need to accept people as who they are, which is not in itself a bad thing. When it gets to the point that you start hearing that because someone's white, that they are privileged over someone that's black, so therefore you need to allow for a student that's different than you to have special exemptions, or that's wrong. It doesn't matter what your sex is, what your color is, your social economic income. In the classroom, we all start off equal, and it's up to each individual to have the opportunity to excel as best as they can, and for the teacher to help them excel as best as they can. We need to teach children that it really doesn't matter those barriers that one may think is being placed on them. They have the responsibility to not let that be the barrier, and to step up and do the best they can. And it's only through hard work that we, accomplish our goals. Heard of it from several parents. Racial stuff, LGBTQ stuff, yeah. It's not as prevalent as other districts. I've heard a lot more from other school board candidates and what they've heard talking to parents, but it's there. It's nationally an issue. But it's not all the teachers. It's a select few. But, you read the news, you see what's coming on, and it's a confusing message for children. When you have 16,000 hours that a child spends in the education system from kindergarten through high school, that's a lot of time. And over time, that builds up, and it causes a lot of confusion. I think it depends on how the child interprets that, but yeah, a lot of confusion, maybe animosity. I know that, we have a lot of challenges here. We've been growing for years. And I look at the budget. We probably are running 80% higher on administrative um, costs than other school districts, but that's not necessarily uncommon in many districts to have heavy on administrative. I think that we need to really look at where our money's going and get it back in the classrooms, support those resources, ensure that our teachers can teach, not follow or being driven to follow um, pushing of propaganda, but really teach. We're seeing a lot of our more seasoned teachers leaving, and even Tom Horns talked about this, Shirley Sapir. It's no secret that most seasoned teachers leave um, on their exit interviews are saying it's a lack of discipline, lack of support of the administration. I've heard many teachers who have left said that, if I say something, then I have the administration, lashing back out at me. It depends. I think teachers need to be paid based on the success of their skill in the classroom. However, right now, you look at what the average teacher pay is, though it did just go up. It's starting off here in Queen Creek, it's right around 45,000. That's not that makes it really hard to even rent a place here in the Queen Creek area. So if you want teachers able to live in the community, I think you need to pay them appropriately that they can exist in the community. Though I don't think anyone went into education thinking that this is going to be something I'm getting rich at, but I think they also need to be compensated so that they're, able to meet their expenses. School choice should drive competition. Now, I've homeschooled my children ever since I was a legislator. Uh, I did it because literally the school board lobbyist came to us when I was in Montana and said, if you put your kids in school, they're going to be dunces. Well, we started homeschooling when I was a legislator because I wanted my family unit up where I was serving. And we kept that going. When I moved to Texas, I was there about 2, 3 days, and the Texas lobbyist showed up at our door and said the same thing. Um, so we have made the choice as a family to homeschool. That's not for everyone. There's many of other options, and I think you also have to realize that not all kids learn the same way in the same environment. One thing as a homeschooler, I've had to homeschool parent, I've had to recognize that my oldest son learns differently than my youngest son. We've had to adapt the classes and the method that we teach them accordingly. That's a lot harder when you get 20, 30 kids in, and that's why we need very skilled teachers that excel at that, so they can teach in a manner that reaches. I think it's a great program. Personally, I have chosen to homeschool our kids without any assistance, but not everyone. Um, it's taken a lot of sacrifice in doing so because we live off one income. That's not really the norm these days. I've been very blessed in that manner. But I think the new ESA program will allow some parents choices that they may not have otherwise been able to afford. I don't see a big movement going to homeschooling, but I could see choices in private school that approximate $7,000 would cover most of the expenses for an elementary and junior high, not the full expense for most private schools for at the high school level. But I would think you hear a lot of, I've heard it from our board members, SOS, that, Save Our Schools, that had the petition trying to get this overturned, that it's going to steal money from the public schools. It's really not. It now makes the money follow that backpack, so to speak. And I think really public schools need to look at, hey, if we're producing a quality product that parents want their children to go to or participate in, then we're not at risk of losing this. I think there could be some potential benefits. those kids or parents that choose other options. It would reduce the number of or the ratio of students to a teacher, which could help in the short term. But I'm really hoping that the school district, at least ours, will start to step up its game more. So we are a district that parents want to participate. I mean, we're all taxpayers. I've chosen to homeschool my kids, but I still want to ensure that as a community, we have a quality education. And that quality education should be the best possible, to where we're striving for scores of 80% or higher. Then we're not settling for D minuses and Fs in the score level. When we start to get to that level, I think parents would look at private charter school and other options far less because they know that we have a quality system here. I think the biggest thing is, if people want to see change, they need to get people in the board that are going to question things, strive to look at things differently. I mean, what Einstein said, if the definition of sanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different outcome. Well, I think we need to be doing some things differently. Two spots, three of us running, two are incumbents. Myself would be the challenger. We are not running on a slate. We have Ken Bragg, who's been there 13 years. He always says how fun it is. I kind of chuckle because I'm thinking, being on the school board's not necessarily supposed to be a fun position. It's a position of serving the community and making hard choices. We have a lot of hard choices. How do you get schools built? How do you ensure the quality of education is increased? And that's not necessarily fun. It shouldn't be fun spending other people's money and then going back to them and saying, hey, we need more money. Then we have Samantha Davis, who's been on there 4 years. I kind of think it's somewhat telling if you go back and look at the initial forum that's out there on YouTube. There was a question asked of each of them about the budgeting system. Neither one could answer it. I stood up and someone said, well, you're not on the board. I said, no, I know how it operates. And I answered it, turned around, looked at my two opponents and said, did I miss anything? And their jaws were kind of dropped. Throughout the forum, Ken kept saying, well, James Knox is right. James Knox is right. Well, James Knox is right. Well, if I'm right, then why aren't you doing something different? I think because, I think it's no mystery how the budgeting system works, but we need board members that will sit here and question it, ensure that money goes into the classrooms. When you start looking at the schools that they're wanting to build. And yeah, we have a need for schools. We're a booming town. But this problem should have been addressed, budgeted for, some savings and planned years ago. As of when I moved back to Arizona 3 years ago, it was a hot topic, and they went to the public to get a bond. The public said, no, they're doing it again, going for a bond, but they're not addressing the key issues on their own. I know that there's a lot of money that could be spent better, but it makes tough choices. You have to weigh out. Some people are going to, lose stuff, so to speak, and other areas are going to win. But we need to ensure that there is a good teacher to pupil ratio, good ratio, good curriculum being taught. We get to the basics. The basics never steered us wrong in the past. It's when, you look historically, when people start trying new things, that's when we've had issues. Not to say that new things cannot be good, but we need to prove some of these out. Have a good evening.